You're listening to The Conversation with Model Mind AI, a weekly check-in with Angela Schultz and Loren Horsager on how to lead through change, stay curious, and get AI ready.
Have you ever wished your AI tools could just do the thing without waiting for you to spell it out every time? Well, you're not alone. And today we're diving into one of the most important and most misunderstood trends in AI, agents. So welcome to the conversation where we explore what's happening in the world of AI and what it means for your business. I'm Angela Schultz, and I'm here with my co-host, Loren Horsager, CEO of Model Mind AI. Welcome, Loren.
Thank you. It's great to be here and welcome everybody. I'm very, very excited about this. This is probably my favorite topic in AI. I think it is, it's the year of AI. I was at our year of Agentic Systems. I was at a conference last week and that came up constantly about 2025 being the Agentic Systems year. So I hopefully we get through some of this today and can help provide people a foundation for how to think about this and how to get started with it. This is very, very early on yet in agent-based systems, but the power, this is like the dream of AI ultimately. This is what we're all waiting for it to help do. And it's not going to do it all right away, but we're going to help start solving problems with this. So I'm very excited to have this conversation today.
Me too, me too. It's actually one of our tracks in our AI assessment, but I think it may be the area that less people are applying. But I think it's because of the newness and maybe the unknown, right? But it has probably the most potential to really advance your business and your ideas. And so maybe we should start by just putting it into a simple metaphor so we can kind of start from the most basic of understanding. So picture a kitchen. And we've talked about workflows. Workflows are like a recipe. Step one, do this. Step two, do that. It's very reliable, but it's pretty rigid. You have to stay on track. So an agent then would be your sous chef. They already know your preferences. They can adjust on the fly if you're out of an ingredient, and they might even have dinner ready before you ask. So same ingredients, but completely different experiences. And Loren, this is where we really lean on you and your expertise. Can you help us to really define what exactly an agent is and why we're talking about them now in 2025?
Sure. So I think this is interesting because there is so much confusion over what this is, what this isn't. There are so many companies that are calling things agents that aren't agents, or are building agents that are calling something else, or we've called things different things. It's just the terminology is very, very loose, and partly it's because this isn't fully figured out, right? But it's getting there very, very quickly, and that's why we want to talk about this today. But let's start with kind of what makes up an agent, at least in my mind. So it's a series of parts. So the first part is you need an AI model, a large language model to process the AI messages, right? So that can be OpenAI, it could be Claude or Grok or Gemini, or it could be an open source one running locally in your environment. So it's some AI model that's going to run the system. The next thing you need is you need instructions, because an agent is basically built to run a specific context of problems. So there's no agent that's going to solve every problem for us. We need an agent around the specific tasks that we're going to give it. So think about that for a second. Like maybe you want an agent to be your personal assistant. Well, you're going to give it specific tasks. And the next thing you're going to, and so we want to make sure we have the instructions around how you want to handle those tasks, right? So if you want it to schedule a flight for you, what airline do you like to fly on? What seat do you like? You need to give it information about that, right? But then you also have to give it tools. So this is the next component of an agent, is giving it access to the right tools so that it can actually perform those functions. Now we have to be careful with tools. We'll talk about this a little bit, but it's where agents get scary, is that we're giving it the ability to actually run transactions against whatever systems we're granting it access to, right? So we could give it access to our computer, for example. Maybe it can run commands on our computer. Well, that means it can run all commands on our computer, right? So we have to be aware of that and understand what that means. But basically, that's the next piece is giving it access to these tools so it can perform tasks that we want to perform. Excuse me. Then the last piece of this is we need to give it memory. And memory is a very complex and tricky thing, but essentially we need to grant our agent the ability to remember what it did before so that it can use that information as it executes the next task and it builds on itself. So when we talk about agents, we're really thinking about this in a very humanistic way. We talk about our AI like when we're training, when you're doing trainings out there, you talk about how AI is really the best result comes when we humanize it, which is
Mhm.
true. But when we're talking about agents, it's even more so. We need to set up our agents and manage them how a human thinks. So this is why memory is really critical. We're giving it memory capabilities so that it can actually pull back the right information at the right time. All of our memory does not fit into the context for any one task, so we have to pull back the right information. We will talk more about memory in the future, but for right now, let's leave it at that because it's a very, very complicated subject. Probably the most interesting subject in AI right now is memory. But it's a fascinating topic. But let's just leave it at that for now, as you need the memory to come back. Now, that what I just mentioned is one agent, a singular agent, and there's lots of uses for singular agents. But that's not where this stops. Where it really gets interesting is when we have different agents that have different capabilities, different knowledge, different memories that can do different things. They have different contexts they're working in, and we put those together into a multi-agent system. That's where things get very, very interesting, and very powerful potentially, and things can go off the rails very quickly potentially. So it's a very interesting process. But so that requires us to have one more layer in an agent, which is this communication layer. And the communication allows us for our agents to talk to each other. It also gives us the ability for our agents to talk to us, right? So one of the things we want to make sure we can design human in the loop systems where we as humans still run the AI. We don't want the AI just off running by itself usually. So we want to build us into how we can also integrate and have conversations with the agents as part of this whole network of agents we might be running.
Yes, I love the idea of the multi-agents. That kind of blows my mind. But you mentioned communication between us and the agents, and I'm leaning into voice mode and voice dictation, and I'm hoping that that kind of allows me then when I interact with a voice agent to have that comfortability. So I'm curious if you think it is easier to interact with just text or interact with voice, or where do you see the future of these agents um, when it comes to communication between us and them?
Well, I think there's a whole series of ways that we communicate with them. So we're all used to chat, right? You go to ChatGPT
Mhm.
or Copilot or whatever tool you're using, and you chat with it, and you can chat with an agent the same way. But we have a whole lot of other means, and some of these other tools are doing this as well. But we have the ability to do voice, like you're talking about. But
Mhm.
let's say you have teams and you have an agent hooked up to a team, and you're just going to go out in Teams and chat, and it's an agent
Mm.
talking back to you, right? So
Sure.
it's essentially a chat, but it's all in Teams, and anybody can interact with that. Now, I think it would be interesting. Let's take multiple agents and put into a team, and now the agents can actually talk amongst themselves as well, to help you solve a problem, right? And this is what gets interesting, and exciting about the multi-agent systems. We can do that, but so it's not just chat. There's even capabilities for, like you talked about voice. Well, why can't an agent call you on the phone and actually talk to you? Well, we've worked on some voice systems that way where it's actually telephony systems where you're actually doing calls where they're able to call and actually have a conversation. This is not perfect yet, but it's getting better and better by the day. And there's actually a couple examples out there that are near human quality, for solutions like that, right? So what if you can actually do a whole bunch of sales calls automatically or customer service calls? We kind of already expect it to be maybe AI driven. So you have to think about how you're applying those things. But the interface goes really deep. What if it's just what if the agent has its own email and we're going to send messages just like I would to an employee? Hey, can you go do this task? And I can send you an email and it can go respond to that, right?
It
So
seems less scary when you put it in that perspective. Or not less scary, but I'm overthinking it too much. I would communicate with an agent just like I would communicate with you or any other team member in
I
our
think maybe it's
company. So
it's
I'm
more it's more
overthinking
scary. I think it's more
it.
scary probably.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it should scare us away from doing this. So what one other way though it can communicate is, and there's quite a few examples of this out there already, like Operator from OpenAI, and there's a couple other examples where it can actually watch
Mhm.
our screens and it can do things on our screen. That's another interface for it to interact with outside of itself, whether it's us or our systems that are communicating with it. But there's a lot of different ways that we can actually interface, and it doesn't have to be. It's called multimodal, right? So it can
Mhm.
be text, it can be voice, it can be files that we're uploading, it can be images, all of these video, all of these things are possible going forward with where the AIs are at and where agentic systems are at.
That brings up a good point. To a lesser level, um, ChatGPT obviously has the vision mode, so I can record the video and interact at the same time. And just in our Copilot class last week, I showed a little snippet from Microsoft of what they're calling Copilot Vision, where it can see your screen and you can just ask for suggestions. How do I make this? Should I do this edit? So it's a dialogue, but they see the screen, not like ChatGPT Operator, where it's actually taking over your screen, but just the vision is more the voice dialogue and conversational
Mhm.
help as a co-pilot, but as a vision mode instead of just you inputting information and giving it context. It has access, so pretty
So,
wild.
so I just want to throw out, Angela just posted this on our internal teams, but how I think one of the things that Angela and I both drive quite a bit, and one of the nice things with like ChatGPT or some of these other tools is the voice mode when you're driving, and you can dialogue and have conversations. Well, now put an agent behind that can actually do things. I think this is a very exciting opportunity where what if I can actually, have my AI respond to my messages, but then send out emails or respond to project plans or communicate with people in different ways, update my schedule or schedule meetings or all sorts of things while we're driving along and just having a conversation. Now, maybe you don't want everybody doing that while they're driving, but I love it.
Sure,
It's
sure.
better than looking
You
at my
know,
phone.
It is one of my favorite parts of class to teach. I always save it for the very end of the day in a training session because I really want people to leave class, go to their car, plug in, uh, you know, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever your pick your poison. But it is where I often get the most feedback is using their time to brainstorm, to even just organize their thoughts or develop a plan. It is really powerful. There's something about saying it out loud and not just thinking it. And so it forces you into that out loud conversation that really kind of puts the pieces together. So big fan. Recommend it if you haven't tried it. You've got to don't stop listening, but when you're done listening, try it out.
Yep. Yep.
Good, good.
Fantastic.
Just before we leave the idea of what an agent really is it truly thinking? And is there a technical way to define like how an agent reasons or thinks?
Oh my. You're gonna stump me. I mean, I
Yes.
haven't. Well, here's. I mean, we get asked this a lot, and so
Yeah.
here's what I tell people. Um, it is it actually thinking? No, it's not.
Right. Right.
But is it doing as good a job as a lot of people I know at thinking? Probably.
Okay.
And so basically it's using its domain knowledge, and if we provide the right knowledge for that case and the reasoning ability of these agents, honestly it works very, very similar to how our brains work in order to find the right information to send back. Now it's a little bit more technical because it's really looking for the next character or the next syllable to respond to, but it's ultimately working quite similar to how our brains work to actually do reasoning. Um, I think a better question is like there's lots of theoretical questions, and what I'm always looking for is like that's great. We can have those theoretical conversations, but ultimately, as a business owner or a business leader, like I want to figure out how do I actually apply this and should I
Mhm.
apply this and what makes sense to apply or not apply and what are the risks associated with that, right? And from
Mhm.
that perspective, does that question matter? I would say it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. It does it perform when I need it to perform in the way I want it to perform. And so that's usually my test to say, is this a good thing to do or not a good thing to do? And so that's how I would look at that problem. It's fun
Okay.
to have the theoretical conversation, but
Yeah.
I think it's kind of pointless.
Maybe that'll be another episode.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. So that, you actually bring up a good point. Does it work or doesn't it? That's more important. So it reminds me of a previous conversation we had about workflows, right? Is there a way that you could explain kind of the difference, or do they overlap between workflows and agents?
Uh, they don't exactly overlap. They're quite a bit different in a few ways. However, a lot of the building blocks are the same, right? So when we're
Mhm.
building out workflows, just like your kitchen example of cooking, recipe, it's a very well laid plan. And if you have a process, very well defined, and the AI needs to come along and say, do I go down this path or this path? That's a great opportunity to apply a workflow. The nice thing about workflows is we know it's always going to go from step A to step B to step C to step D, or do the decisions that those steps have programmed into them. In when we talk about agents again, very similar to a workflow where we're applying in an AI step in a workflow, we're putting an AI model in, we're giving it some instructions, giving it prompts, giving it data. Um, and tools potentially as well. But we're ultimately defining that one step. When it comes to the agent view of that, it's all the same components that make that up, except we're now letting the agent decide what tools to run and what the next step is. So it's no longer us laying that all out. One thing that's kind of cool is that you can actually build an agent that essentially performs a workflow by just verbally
Mhm.
typing up and say, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. And that works. And it works really well. It's potentially a little more risky than defining it as a workflow. Now, sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes we want that option that, okay, 90% of the time we want this workflow, but every once in a while we need a different workflow because of whatever situation. Okay, maybe that becomes an agent. The agent makes the best determination of what to do at runtime. So, you know what, which is better? It depends on the use case. Right
Mhm.
now, today, the other part of this decision is the tools for building workflows are quite advanced and very much solid to do that. So we deal with a lot of tools like Power Automate in Microsoft World, Zapier, Make.com, N8N. So these kind of tools that you can build those workflows in and actually have a very good working system. Um, Technologists are happy about implementing those solutions because they're low risk because you're controlling what the options are that it can do. Versus an agent is a little more scary to people because you don't really know what the results are going to be consistently in the same way. Now, I think we're going to talk about this later, but there are ways that we can actually test things. You just need to make sure you have good enough coverage to understand your edge cases of where something could go wrong in your agents. But um, they're both valid in different for different purposes.
I can't help but finding the human connection in what you're talking about today. And I think of me as an employee. I think there's times that you probably want me to be a workflow, and then there's times you want me to be an agent, right? Good or bad, there's a little bit of both in everything we do. And so I see the crossover, but I also see the value in both.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So that brings me to the question, because I've heard so many examples, almost overwhelming, of what agents can do. So is there any way that you can kind of put into categories what types of agents there are and where specifically what we're seeing most often in businesses?
Uh, Again, this is very early on, so there's not there's lots of use cases that have been applied, but I think we're going to see a lot more over the next 6 months. As an example, and this maybe doesn't apply super directly to our audience exactly, but it's a very interesting example. So last week I was at the Mayo AI conference, and they had a speaker from Google there, and I'll try to kind of explain what he said, but they built a solution called AI Co-Scientist. And basically, what they were doing is, I think they had 12 agents that they built, and then they connected them together, and they would give the agent, the whole network, a problem. And I think one of them had something to do with liver disease or something. I can't remember exactly, but basically they had like a one paragraph problem that they gave. And so they had an agent that was designed to do research, and they had their medical records of data that it could go look at, all the medical journals or whatever they gave them access to. And the researcher went out and found all the information related to this, right? And I don't think it was just like let's say it was liver disease. It didn't, but it did anything with the liver then. So it got all the related information about that, and then treatments that are out there right now, and then how thing like all the studies that have been done around that, successful or not successful, and it brought all that research in. Then it turned it over to the rest of the agents, and they debated what the potential solutions to this problem were. And it was very interesting. It ran for about 2 hours, I think it was, and basically it identified the top 10 solutions that it thought would solve this problem. And so the agents actually debated among themselves in order to come up with the solution and say, hey, I think this is the right solution. I think this is the right solution. The interesting takeaway from this is that in 2 hours, they then went back to the doctors that have been working on this for like 15 years. And the doctors had actually come up with the solution, and they hadn't published anything about it yet. And they shared that with the doctors, and they already knew that that was the right answer. The number one answer was the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, they took the top three, and the second one, they said they thought of that as well, and that was not the right answer, and they had tested, and it was not the right answer for whatever reason. More interestingly, option number three was something completely novel that had never been thought of before, another way to approach this. And because it had all the information and looked at this holistically, it had actually come up with an idea that potentially didn't exist before. So people talk about how it's just regurgitating everything that exists. It had created a new idea out of all that information. And the doctors actually said, that actually might work. So now they're testing that as well. Which is pretty fascinating that it's able to do that. And it's this ability of agents to work together to solve a problem. Sometimes that's collaboratively, sometimes that's competitively, right? To say, hey, I need to come up with a solution and then share that and cheer on my idea to get this mine, people to vote for mine, essentially. And so there's different viewpoints. What I think is really interesting about these structures as we think about types of agents that are going to get developed, and my view is that everybody will have an agent associated with them at some point. And so you will be able to assign things to your agent will be able to assign things to you, but your agent will be able to talk to your boss's agent, or employees agents that they need to work together to solve things without us. But we want to stay humans in the loop and actually be able to guide this and control this and help direct where we're going with it. I think that's what makes us really interesting, is this ability to have really powerful agents that can do a lot of things, but we get to plug into that and actually make us better, and we get to make it better as we're going.
So it's interesting. I can't wait till I get my own agent, just for the record. It'll be an exciting day. But what I do have right now that is almost a smaller scale version of this is I have a custom GPT called Angela on Demand, right?
Mhm.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'm starting to understand the difference between a custom assistant or a GPT versus an actual agent. So my custom GPT, Angela on Demand, has a large language model. So it's connected, it's got a brain. I've written out really specific instructions on how I want it to act and perform. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't act. Is
Yeah.
that really the trigger point between a co-pilot agent? I know you don't like that when I say that because it's not a true agent, but a co-pilot agent or a chat GPT version, which is the custom GPT. Is that the delineating factor there between the two?
Um, it, yeah, although I kind of break it down a couple ways. So one thing is, as we think about an agent, there's lots of things that you've been teaching in class, right? That are pretty much like agents. So even when you do
Yes.
say co-pilot agent, that is, there's just limiting factors to make it really a full-blown agent, right? So when you think about like a custom GPT or something, you're putting all that information in. You can actually put in tools, which we don't do a lot
That's
in class right
true.
now.
Yeah.
But you can put tools into there, and that makes an agent. But I think what's powerful is, okay, so you can have these individual agents, and that's going to be a good thing. But it gets really powerful when the agents are communicating with other agents and you have a multi-agent system, including they don't even have to be of the same system or same type. There's a lot of new protocols coming out to actually, so one agent in one domain could talk to another agent in another domain, built by different people at different places, right? So that's where this starts to get interesting. And so now you, as like, okay, you're writing curriculum. Well, you could have a curriculum writer and a trainer agent and maybe some other agents to help in this process of researching, that you're going to have this whole team of agents. So we want to
Hmm.
participate in the team, and we want the agents to talk together and potentially share memory as well. So they'll have their own memory, but also this ability to share. Like, think about when we do a project, we actually have a collective brain of what our knowledge of what we understand about that project, and everybody on the team needs to understand that, right? Well, the same thing can happen in multi-agent world where we're sharing some of that information across the team.
Yeah. So when I asked you what types of agent there are, I almost want to take that question back and I want to rephrase it because it really depends on the use case, on the business, on what the area is that they're needed for. How about this? What's the tipping point between what's something I do as an employee that there's a tipping point where it becomes an agent worthy use case? Like, where do we think, oh, okay, I've worked up into this point. I could really use an agent for this. Is there a tipping point where you think it's worth a company to invest in an agentic system?
I'm going to answer that with I don't think we know yet. So this is very different than workflows. So workflows, it's pretty easy to evaluate and say we have this process, and if we add an AI component to this, we can actually automate a process that's never been automated or only partially automated, right? And you
Yes.
can pretty easily quantify generally the benefit of doing that and the cost of doing that. With
Hmm.
agents, we're gonna give it an agent the ability to act in a certain domain. So maybe it's again the personal assistant is going to have access to your calendar and your email and maybe some other features. But um, we've given it that access. We don't quite know how we're going to use it technically going into that. And we have some ideas and we can test those ideas, which we want to do, but we don't really know how we're going to use it tomorrow, right?
Hmm.
Where a workflow, we know exactly it's going to go step A, step B, step C, and do that. And so we can quantify that. So in some ways, we don't know that, and we don't know when it makes sense to build this. I think it's probably going to make sense earlier rather than later because what are the gains out of doing an agentic system? So one of the things is if we are partnering this with a human, we're starting to make a collective knowledge base of what we know as a company, and be able to capture that and share that better. Which
Hmm.
means we bring in someone new, a new human. We actually have a way to train them up more effectively, a faster way to train them up. But we also get to let humans focus on more the tasks that I think are going to be more enjoyable at work, right? I don't need someone to do this step all the time and it's repetitive. I need someone that can think about things and actually make better decisions. So, we start building these systems that can do that. But honestly, this is fairly new. It's not that complicated to make agentic systems. Right now, there's no good visual way to do this, which is the problem. Um, so I think that's all coming. The other thing I'll say is I've had a few conversations this week with people that have been really interesting about agentic systems, and I think we're getting into a realm where, like, this is a technology and we have to think about implementing it as a technology, but much more important, in order to make it effective, we have to think about like organizational leadership and organizational structure, of how we structure AI agents and how we train those agents and how we think about those agents. That's what's going to be more important in order to get a good system design. That a good system design means we need each of those agents to perform well, but we also need the overall system to have all the components. So let's take an example. Let's say uh, let's say I create a series of agents as part of a network, and I now want to write software with them, but I haven't trained any of them specifically on that process. Maybe I've trained them all on marketing stuff. Well, if I tell them to go write some code for a new website or a new web application or something, they're going to do that. Are they going to do that very well because they don't have the instructions properly? Well, in the underlying model, it probably has enough information they can do it reasonably well, but we could do it a lot better if we actually had a developer agent that was trained up to do development, right? So think about that for any role. So we need to make sure we have the right agents in our network for what we're trying to do. And yeah, so I think that's how to think about this more. And it does become more of like an organizational leadership problem.
Yeah, I love a good flow chart. And I really like the idea of that I am going to be assigned an agent or that I am going to work alongside the agent. And it's not necessarily something that is going to be um, working in its own system, right? Like there's that commonality, that overflow between. Okay, trick question. Is there any reason might not want to use an agent to solve a problem?
For sure. One of the issues is unpredictability, right? So we can't guarantee what the outcome is going to be of that. So we need to actually have we need to be really good at how we design our agents, and we need to be careful of what capabilities we give our agents, and then we need to be willing to take the risk on what capabilities we're giving it to actually execute those.
Sure. Okay. So when you talk about building, so what type of tools are developers using right now to build out these agents?
So right now, most of this is done, actually almost exclusively, this is done in code, which is why it's a clunky process right now. There are tools coming out, and we're working on our own tool actually for ourselves that allows us to visually actually create these agents. Because again, the process for determining how to design an agent and an agent system should be a visual process, and right now that's all very, very much a programming process, which is why this is pretty much limited to programmers so far to build out these systems. That's changing. It's changing very quickly. Over the next couple of months, we're going to see a lot of options come out in ways that we can implement these solutions. And then we're going to have lots of comparisons on who has the best memory models and who has the best, who can integrate with the different AI models. Another thing that we're going to see is when we're building out agents and we're testing agents, what is the right AI model to actually plug into for this agent versus that agent? They're all not going to run on the same model. I get asked a lot, what's your favorite AI model right now? And it's like, well, that changes week to week. And I think yours just changed somewhat as well. And that's going to
Mm-hmm.
drive our systems as we're thinking about this and thinking about like what we should be, what models we should be using, and letting the AI models figure out what the best solution is for that type of problem.
Sure. What type of code is really being used right now in all AI development? Is there a new type of code or an old, are we using the oldie but the goodie? What are we using for coding?
Well, if you're familiar, it's mostly Python is probably the number
Okay.
one language. Now, I'm not a Python developer. I'm a .NET developer, by trade. So I think it's interesting. Any language can do this, but
Okay.
most of the interfaces to the large language models are in Python, or they've been rolled out to most languages now. So most languages have some way of
Okay.
interfacing with them. Mostly what you see from a research perspective or a lot of the tools that come out, though it's in Python.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
If kids want to learn something, Python's a fairly easy language to learn, and it would be a really good language to learn right now. Will that be the case 5 years from now? I don't know, but I
Sure.
think there's some other things that are happening that might change that. But right now, great language to learn.
I just had a software developer recommend. I'm trying to dabble in code. I want to play. I want to sit at the cool kid table someday. So I'm dabbling in code, but they had mentioned that I should try this children's game called Code Combat as a way to enjoy. It's a gamification of how to learn code. So maybe if you're in the same boat as I am, you can learn a little code on the side. But it just makes everything right now. It's if you want to learn it, there's an avenue to kind of gain
Yep.
that knowledge and that insight. So pretty exciting
So
times.
you know what? If you want to learn it, so I love that what you just mentioned, but AI can actually help you learn code very, very quickly as well and very effectively. So a lot of times what we're seeing younger coders do is like, especially if you have two screens or if you don't just side by side, have your code window up in one side and have an AI window up in the other and just ask it, how do I do this? How do I do that? There are
Mhm.
other tools out there now that are actually agents actually running in solutions like Cursor as an example, Lovable as an example where you can actually write software very easily. Now, you're probably not going to learn as much with those tools, but also just ask the AI to put together a plan to say, hey, I want a 30-day plan on how to learn Python. It'll do that and
Right.
it'll do it effective, especially if you turn on the deep research part of that. It'll find you the resources on the web, videos and text, like things to read and actually get you there.
Yeah.
Potentially even having it ask, here's daily questions to quiz you to make sure you're actually getting there. So
Yeah, my curiosity was sparked because they mentioned that a lot of it is just problem solving and
yeah.
thinking about ways to build and make it work, and that definitely captured my interest. So I'll keep you posted on my coding journey. So back to our agents, I guess. And one thing I noticed even in building out my GPTs, depending on the task, you can't just set it and forget it, right? Oftentimes I have to go back and do some maintenance or make some updates to my GPTs that I create. So what's the process of managing and maintaining something like a not only an agent but a multi-agent system?
Uh, so there's a couple components to this. This is very similar to how we talk about maintenance and testing. Maintenance is part of testing, right? So
Mhm, mhm,
you're really looking at this from how do you continue to test it, and then you find additional things. Maybe you want to add capabilities to it. Maybe something changed and it's not handling, or you didn't test it fully properly initially, and you're finding bad results in certain cases right now. So how do you fix that? So another thing that can happen is AI models come and go. So if it's no longer available and now it's switched models, the whole thing might work a little bit differently. So you need to go back and run tests and validate that it's still working. When it comes to testing, so that's when it comes to testing an agent, right? So we need
mhm,
to think about, and we're going to do a deep dive into testing here at some point, but when we talk about testing, we want to think about like, what is the context that this agent is meant to work in? And can I come up with questions I can ask to validate this? And then we actually want to use the AI in this process to say, now, if this is my context, what am I missing when I'm in from all the questions I'm asking? What didn't I ask, or what areas do I have gaps that I haven't really challenged it on? Because we want to try to fully flush out where if I wanted to answer questions on this whole context, and I've only answered parts of asked questions to test it on only parts of that, then we're not fully testing it out. So that's where AI can actually help us in that process to figure it out. When it comes to agentic systems, it gets a little bit more complicated because we need to test each of our agents, but
mhm.
we also then need to look at this around how do we do connections between agents and test those. I think there's going to be some things that come out. I'm hoping for this in the near future around how to think about that and how to build out those systems. Right now, it's mostly you test it manually by
Mhm.
asking a question to the whole system, and the system works on it, and you see if it worked or not. I think there's going to be better ways to do that in the future. We obviously have to start with testing the individual agents, but then you put that together in a system somehow to test
So
it.
I'm still trying to grasp this, but is it possible for an agent to keep improving upon itself because of its memory and the more context and like is it less of a maintenance concern as a human because the agent is improving just like I'm improving every day as an employee because I'm researching and learning and I have my own personal experience with problem solving within this role. Is an agent able to kind of improve upon its earlier version?
Yes and no. It's not improving like you are. So
Okay.
so you're right that it's getting more information and it's adding that to its memory. That doesn't always make it better because it depends what information is loaded into it. And so as you're adding information, one of the things that can happen, and this is where memory systems have a long way to come yet, is that if I add a whole bunch of information, and now let's say I have lots of kind of duplicate information and I go ask a question of my agent. Well, what happens is it first goes out and says, give me the information from memory that's relevant to this, but I only have this window of this much data I can fit. But on this topic, I have, 10 times that much information. What
Mhm.
tends to happen is it tends to pick the same responses then. So more information actually made it worse because less information would give me a more well-rounded answer of other ways it could get this information in there. So memory is not a perfect
Okay.
solution right now. Um, and there are self-improving AI systems. Um, there's ways to do that and ways not to. I don't want to get deep into that today, but
Sure,
there
sure.
are ways to actually have the agents improve themselves or have other agents improve them, which is a much better solution as to how they actually process things. So there's other ways to do that beyond just adding memory. Adding memory potentially helps, but it potentially hurts as well the way current memory systems work.
Okay. So if you're a business owner, if you're a leader, if you're a decision maker, and you are starting this AI journey, what I know we have our AI assessment that kind of brings to light and what where you're at, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and like what steps you need to take. But how do you start specifically with agents to grow your business? Where do you start?
So I think the critical thing, and I'm going to talk about our training for a little bit, but even if it's not with our training, I think there are steps that the reason we've laid out our training the way it is because I think there's steps that need to happen in order for people to get to these systems. Our
Mhm,
goal is for people to get to workflows and to get to agentic systems, but you
mhm,
can't start there because if you
mhm,
start there, it's not going to make any sense and you're not going to understand how to maintain it, how to actually build this, how you think about managing. And our goal is everything we've talked about so far a non-technical person can actually comprehend
mhm,
comprehend how to interact with it. Maybe not how to configure and set up everything, but they can understand how to manage it and how it should think and how it should act. Um, so as we're thinking about that, the first thing, and this is why we have our one-on-one class, it's about how do I get into this and how do I understand prompting really well?
mhm,
And people talk about prompting's dead. That is not true because we have to use prompting in order to test all these other systems. So we have to have a good handle on prompting. We also have to have a good handle on prompting so we can validate what instructions we're giving our workflows and our AI, our agents.
mhm,
The next step is building beyond that. So how are you going to share those what you're building, like custom GPTs or prompts or whatever, with other people on your team, and expanding that out into more depth, learning about how to test prompts. So all those processes are really critical. Then we can get into building workflows and actually using these processes in a workflow to be effective because now we understand how to think about this and manage it. And
mhm,
then we can actually do the same with agentic systems. So that's our linear approach to getting to agents is start by getting deep into prompting and understand how to prompt and just using AI. Then start to use this with your team and start to share it with people. Now start to build out some workflows with this and start to automate some things. And now you'll be ready to implement agents, especially as the software for agents, the tools to support this are going to be coming a lot more, they're going to be a lot better in the next three to
mhm.
six months.
That's so important, this idea of a mind shift, right? I usually, even in a one-day training, I can kind of feel at lunch that there's a little bit of a shift in the type of questions people are asking and the ideas that are being sparked and generated in class. And when I have a group of people that are all from the same company, there's this shared experience that happens. But I think the value is really the common language that comes out of a class. Now they're kind of speaking the same language and they
Yeah.
understand one another, which can be really powerful. That's what builds that momentum and ultimately creates the cultural change or the shift in thinking at a company. So that's really interesting that you start at 101 and build towards it.
Right. And that goes back to our assessment, right? Why do we, like when we're doing
Mhm.
coaching with people, why do we say it's these 6 areas? And one of those is training your team. And that's a critical one to be able to have the foundation for doing several of these components like agents and workflows. So if you haven't trained them, you're not going to be able to implement this effectively. You're not going to be able to manage this effectively. I think it's a critical part of the process.
Yeah, yeah. Even just to have dialogue, you need to have that common language and
Yep.
that that um that that world, that bubble that you can kind of share to move forward. So
And
interesting.
the other thing that does is it identifies your power users, your AI power users,
Ah,
right? And the power users are going to be critical for your success leveraging AI to really build efficiencies in your organization. What we find is your power users tend to be usually higher level people who are, or people that are deeply embedded in a process and they know how to make
mhm,
it more efficient. They just have never had the tool to make it more efficient. So they start to come up with ideas and solutions to act that will radically change your business and make it more effective. So
mhm,
getting them trained, getting them through and getting that knowledge in multiple people and sharing and talking about this. I think one of the things that you enjoy most out of our classes is getting people from different organizations that come together and talk and actually
mhm,
see they're learning from each other, right? And I think that
mhm,
process has been really, really effective for, oh, you're trying to solve this problem. We have that problem. I should maybe look at that as well and come up with a solution to that problem. So, um,
mhm.
yeah.
You mentioned in class, I can think of two different scenarios that are both dramatically different. And just this week, I had a gentleman who was a CEO of a company and was bringing his employees in because he was really encouraging them, almost demanding them that they use AI, right? And then the flip side of that is I've also had people in class that kind of come and they fly under the radar because their bosses don't know they're there, but they're curious and they're
Mhm.
excited to kind of change up their workday, but it's a secret. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the cultural shift will kind of change because when your leader is in the room with you and encouraging you, it's such a different feeling, and just to feel the support and being able to lean into all things AI right now is such a benefit. When it comes from the leadership, it's really, really powerful. So I always appreciate when the CEO comes along and brings his um, all the teams along with them. So very, very powerful. Um, it's that time, Lauren.
Prompt of the week time. I love it. Let's
Yes.
do it.
Okay, this time I'm going to make you put your thinking cap on because I've got a doozy for you. Um, to close out today's episode, we're going to spotlight a prompt of the week. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but a lot of these platforms have what are called reasoning models. And I'm absolutely into it. It is so spectacular what the capabilities are. And so we're going to push the limits a little bit and really try to get a heavy response in return from just a single prompt. So whether you're in ChatGPT, it's called Deep Research. Microsoft Copilot has one right now called Deep Thinking. And all of them push beyond a quick answer and really give you a pretty dynamic response. So in some ways it's similar to a single agent who's going out and completing multiple tasks. The cool part is it usually shows you step by step in the deep research mode what it's thinking and what it's doing, whether it's analyzing or searching. So kind of an interactive experience. So here it is. Our prompt of the week, this has come up in class quite a bit, this idea of, is your website built and designed for not only Google searching, but also in this age of AI and people capturing information from your website in a good way. So we are going to tell our ChatGPT or Copilot to act as an SEO strategist, advising a leadership team on how to approach SEO in 2025. We're going to use one of these deep research models, and we're going to ask it to break it into several components. We're going to ask for emerging trends, and making sure that there's a credible source connected to them. I even set a date of 2024 or 2025, because anything older than 6 months is no good to me, right? Then we're going to dive into actionable strategies to improve organic searches. I want comparison of the 3 top SEO tools. And then lastly, what are some key insights or forecasts from industry experts? So what is to come? And then because they're going to give us so much information, it's really important that we express how to format the response. So for this particular one, I'm going to ask for a really executive ready report with headings, a short summary at the end, maybe even ask to include some visual charts along the way. So this one may take a while, but I was just listening to a podcast with Sam Altman, and he thought that deep research wouldn't fly, that people would be too impatient. But what they're finding is people are willing to wait for these longer responses if the quality is there. So you may have to take a little break, walk away and come back. But when you do return, you're going to get this high quality response with sources and insights that is just going to blow you away. The
You know
first
what I
time I
think?
did deep research, I couldn't stop.
I think that's really interesting because some of these do take, like, if you put in a lot of information, it takes, I mean, it can take 15, 30 minutes sometimes for an answer to come
Right.
back. And what I think is interesting about that, though, like, my goal is every night when I'm done with work is I start off a deep research and then I just leave it and I am done for the day. And then I come back
Yes.
the next morning and I have a nice article to deep dive into whatever I was trying to research. And it's just a great way to learn. It's a great way to put thoughts together. It's a great way to kind of write or start on something that now I can kind of dialogue back and forth in just normal chat dialogue to actually work on. Like, let's say I'm working on a presentation for something. I can start that off by doing the research and finding, things that I want to highlight or that it thinks I should highlight. But now I can customize it, make it my own after the fact and dialogue back and forth. But I have all the information really to start with to make that
Mhm.
happen. So whether it's a coding example, a marketing example, or a learning example, it's just such a great thing to do every day before I'm done. And, I think it's interesting. It would be interesting to just compile all these results as like, wow, the things that I've gone through in the last 30 days. It's pretty
Mhm.
powerful. So
I'm surprised you haven't built an agent to do that for you.
I'm working on
Okay, okay,
that.
okay, good, good, good. Well,
Just you
that
wait.
okay. Well, that's a perfect example of how agents and thoughtful prompting can really move us beyond surface level answers into strategic support. I mean, the research aspect of that alone is priceless. So I hate to say it, but this wraps up our conversation on agents, what they are, when to use them, how to compare to a good old fashioned workflow. So, whether you're building your first automation or thinking about agents and how they could transform your team, we hope that this gave you a practical starting point. Lauren, any last words of advice for someone who's on the edge of testing an agent but not quite sure if they're ready?
I will tell people, you heard today, there's lots of unanswered questions in this world right now. And agents is definitely one of them. How we apply them, what are they going to do? Are we comfortable with that? It's going to take a little bit of time to roll this out. But if you're not getting ready for that, these are going to come at us so fast and so quick, and they're already happening. There's lots of products that are rolling out agents. You talk about deep research, which is really an agent. These things are happening very, very quickly. and the opportunity is really massive. So we need to be preparing for that. And that really means going back to the basics of, am I learning about prompting? Am I learning about the components that go into this to build workflows, build out tools that I'm going to call, um, so that I understand how that's going to work. So I just think that's critical to the process right now, is making sure me and my team are going down this path to actually be prepared.
Yeah. That makes me think, at the beginning of this episode, you said that 2025 was going to be the year of the agent. And if I think about it, we're already on the 7th month of
Yeah.
2025. So we're halfway through the month, or over halfway through the month. So we better, if you haven't started talking about agents, you better start, right? The clock's
September is
ticking.
going to be the month of the agent.
There we go. There we go. I love it. I love it.
This is out there right now. If you want to go explore some tools, I'll just add one thing. So if you are a coder and want to explore some tools, one of the tools to look at, if you go to their website, just because it really does a great job of kind of explaining this, is to go look at Creu AI, CREU AI. I think it's just crewai.com or something like that. I can't remember their website, but it's really, really good as an explanation. Now, in order to create agents, you have to do this all in Python. But if you're into running Python, it's a great way to kind of start to dabble with this and start to understand how they work. But there's other tools coming out and things are changing very, very quickly with this. But it's a very good tool to kind of get an idea. But their website is even better to just go read and understand more about how this works. Or like Angela just said, to go out and use deep research to write, a 75-page paper for you on how to understand agents and how to prepare. Highly recommend it.
Nice, nice, nice. And if you don't want to read a 75-page report, you can start with our AI readiness assessment, right? Or reach out to us. We would love to kind of walk beside you on this journey. So it's just a great way to kind of identify where your starting point is and what the next steps may look like. So thank you so much for that good tip, Loren. And for those of you listening, please subscribe to the conversation and follow us at modelmind.ai for tools, training, strategy, consulting, coaching. We are here for you in all things AI. If you would also like to share your ideas on how you're applying AI in your business, we would love to hear from you. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being part of the conversation with Model Mind AI. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and stay curious.